Listen to another very enticing story, and this time around from a lady of the fellowship. Please welcome with me Dr. Magaret Egbele as she tells us the story of her life.
My parents were not overly religious, but we did the needful. We went to church every Sunday, Christmas, New Year's Eve, Easter services. We lived in a professional class neighborhood. Each of my parents had a saloon car to himself, herself. All four of us kids attended expensive primary schools. My father especially took pride in ensuring that we had a full complement of books, school uniforms, bags, and everything we needed every year. However, as you all know, late 70s, early 80s were not a very good time for Nigeria. The military came, structural adjustment came. As the economic recession bit harder, and my father was one of the unfortunate men who lost their jobs during that time, it became increasingly more difficult to maintain the standard of living that we were used to. New clothes, processed foods, shoes, all the things we were taking for granted became unaffordable. My mom, like so many other women, had to become creative while purchasing food. And my father, with nothing left to do, became a gentleman farmer with indifferent results. School fees and house rent became a struggle, and money, or the lack of money, became a frequent cause of arguments in our house. My parents were genteel about it. Most of the arguing occurred in the privacy of their bedrooms. But of course, the tension filled the whole house. We became increasingly unhappy and fractious. I mean the children. Each of us adopted different coping mechanisms. My father, becoming increasingly disillusioned with church and religion, stopped attending altogether and escaped to his farm. My mother did her very best to make up. She went for further education, came back, and actually got accelerated promotion and more responsibilities without a commensurate increase in salary. My brothers started acting out. They became involved in very many hair-raising escapades that only served to worsen the tension that was already in the house. My sister became severely depressed and was in and out of hospital for several years. Each of us has their story to tell, but in all of our stories, we will realize that God was at work even in those very dark and turbulent times, and He brought all of us safely through. But I'm here to tell my own story. I've always been blessed with pretty looks as a child. I had quick wits, a facility with words that made me a favorite with my uncles and my aunts and my teachers in school. But I was also moody, I was introspective, I was quick to anger, and I was quick to take offense. As things became more difficult at home, I began to retreat into my own world. I became increasingly secretive and fearful. I had a very active imagination, which was fed by my voracious appetite for books and films, and we had plenty of that in my house. But my imagination became rather morbid and became a heavy burden to me as a child. I was plagued with nightmares and depressive thoughts. To assuage my unhappiness, I did what a lot of women and a lot of children do. I started to overeat. So from a chubby but pretty little girl, as evidenced by the pictures on the walls in my house, I became an obese and unattractive adolescent. Of course, my schoolmates picked on me. And them picking on me, I began to withdraw even more and more. The absolute worst part of it was one night, I was so fed up with everything that I went out of the house. It was night, around 8 p.m., maybe around this time. I took one of my father's razors. I went to the gutter at the back of our house, and I attempted to slit my wrists. But it was painful. As I put the razor and the blood welled up, I lost courage and stopped it. I was 10 years old. I would almost certainly have attempted again and eventually succeeded. If we were to go by my family history, we have a very strong predilection for mental illness, specifically depression, in my family on both sides. At least I can remember one aunt that committed suicide about 2 years from the events I'm about to tell you. And several of my family members ended their lives in one mental institution or the other. But I digress. If the Lord had not intervened in my family at that crucial time, I just don't know whether I would even be alive. Talk less of standing before you today. Meanwhile, all the help we could ever need was very close at hand, if only we knew it. We attended a vibrant, spirit-filled church. In those days, very rare. I was born into and we attended Oritamefa Baptist Church in Ibadan. But even though we went there every Sunday, we were not plugged into the source of life. So it seemed that everybody else was flourishing and making it, and we were just like poor cousins in the midst of all those people. It embittered my father greatly. And yet, all we needed to do was to cede control of our lives from our own hands to the hand of God. But because we stubbornly, all of us, stubbornly clinged to our self-sufficiency and pride, we shut ourselves off from that abundant life. Thank God I met the Lord. My brothers and sisters can tell you their story, but my story started in the year 1987. It was Easter. I was 11 going on to 12. I remember after a particularly nasty quarrel in the bedroom, of course, and the tensions, I walked out of our house. We were living in Gate, Yidi area of Ibadan. And I left the house without telling anybody, and I trekked all the way from Yidi to Gate to Total Garden where the church was. I didn't realize that it was Easter Friday. There was nobody in church except a group of people around the church bus. And somebody just invited me, one of my aunts specifically, just quite by chance. Kemi, do you want to go to camp with us? Camp? Anywhere. So I went back home. Daddy, Brabi said I should come to camp. They couldn't care less. They were embroiled in their own palaver. So I packed my school bag and I entered the church bus and I went along with them. As I recall, I was one of the youngest persons in that camp, which held at Camp Young in Ede, in Osun State. I remember that trip because I was full of gloom and depression. I was fervently hoping that anything will happen. Maybe there will be an accident, or maybe something will happen, so that I will not have to go back home again. I was not interested in anything that was happening there. I was just talking to myself. There were like 3 people in my head talking to themselves. Remember, I was 11 years old going on to 12, and nobody knew what was happening to me. I was not interested in what they were doing, except in the food they were serving, and they served us very big, nourishing meals. But on Sunday, Easter Sunday, it was in the night also. It seems everything good that happens to me happens at night. About this time, it was Easter Sunday service, and I just started to cry. I started weeping. Thank God for children ministers. thank God for the Spirit of God. Somebody just drew me out of the crowd into the counseling room and prayed for me. They led me in the sinner's prayer. And as I accepted Christ, I was baptized in the Holy Ghost that night. After the weeping and crying, and I went back to the dormitory, around 11 o'clock, I went back to sleep immediately. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing I noticed was the silence. I mean the silence in my head. Because I was used to different voices saying this, talking about that, commenting about my behavior, and they were all silent. The second thing I noticed was the joy. I can't describe it though. To a child that I now know as a medical doctor that was suffering from severe depression, it was as if all my life I had been under a cloud that was raining and thundering. And the cloud just blew away and the sunshine just came out. It was immediate. It was for real. I never doubted for 1 minute that something had happened to me. Nobody in my house doubted for 1 minute that something had happened to me when I got home. I was so markedly changed that my father, who was by that time militantly opposed to anything religious, did not attempt to debar me from attending all the church activities that I started going to, because he saw that my behavior had improved radically. I was no longer the one provoking quarreling in my house. Rather than that, I was helping to relieve the tensions. I started pulling my weight with house chores so that my mom could now dispense with the house helps that were causing an additional wahala for us in the house. And despite the fact that they could no longer afford to buy all the books like they were doing before, my father noticed that my grades actually improved rather than going down the way they expected that I was going to church. So they allowed me to go to church. And then I lost weight. You will not believe what a great difference that made. When I was 13 years old, I just decided voluntarily that I'm going to lose weight. I'm not going to continue to eat like the way I was eating before. Because I was eating to make myself happy. I realized that Jesus was the one that made me happy. So I went on a diet at 13 years old. Within 1 year, I lost 20 kg of weight. You can say that I'm not a slim person, but I tell you, if you look at all the women in my house, I'm positively svelte. I am just trim, because most of the women in my house are actually on the big side. So this is my story. It's an ongoing story. I invite you, I urge you, let Jesus into your boat. Your life will not be the same again.
Thank you very much.